I'm Megan Jones from ICEA, and I'm here with Sanath Rajagopal from
Hi.
STAT. We would like to welcome you to the first of our 4 sessions in the 2020 virtual conference. First up today is Bob Hunt, the president of Gallareth Federal, executive vice president for the ICEA International Board, and an all-around Renaissance man. He is a bird watcher and a cigar aficionado, a bluegrass guitarist, and I could just go on. So Bob, if we'll start us off today with cybersecurity cost issues facing today's cost analysts. Bob?
Yes, thank you, Megan. Let me just say a few words of introduction first. All these slides are open source. You can have them. You can send me an email or Sanath or Megan. More than happy to share this presentation with you. Kind of beginning to tell you what I'm going to talk about, and then I'll go through the slides fairly quickly. Today, it seems to me that the cost approach to cybersecurity is failing us, and I'm going to hypothesize 1 or 2 new approaches to address cybersecurity costs. So that's the key to this briefing. You're not going to learn anything particularly new here today, but you are going to see an approach that we are working on and hopefully can collaborate with other people to expand, modify, and fulfill that approach. So the first thing that we talk about is kind of the national priorities, and in the U.S. I can tell you that it's space dominance, data analytics, and cybersecurity are the 3 big things driving us, and cybersecurity brings all those things together. Anyone that thinks cybersecurity is not a big deal or there's nothing to worry about is just not paying attention to what's going on in the world today. So to start this conversation off, I thought I would come up with a hypothetical example. And so I'm talking about a 100 by 100 secure facility with in-house and cloud applications. I call the company Apex, and it's a COCO, contractor-owned, contractor-operated organization. They are developing software and integrating it into chips on a classified DoD communications projects. So the first issue facing the cost analyst is how broad is the definition of cybersecurity? So I came across a new term just this week and talked about, I called it infrastructure, but the new term is cyber physical systems. So the question is, does cybersecurity include the SCIF, that's secure classified information facility? Does it include providing perimeter protection? Does it include preventing access to the heating and air conditioning system or the power source? Does it include cloud security? Is it more than networks? What about the support tail, the operating and support sustainment tail associated with cybersecurity? Does it include a disaster recovery plan, live recovery, contingency planning? Does it include best practices for recovery? And then the big issue facing cybersecurity is, where are the data? So the question that I would propose to the audience and to any involved is, how much should Apex spend and/or the government allocate for cybersecurity for this program? So I'm just going to walk through some options and alternatives and propose a solution at the end. So I can tell you that a secure facility, if I use the PAX newsletter, is somewhere around $560 per square foot. That's in current dollars. A typical visitor control center is about $480 per square foot. A gatehouse is around $730. Cameras and monitoring around $1,300 with $2,300 for panning and zoom. If it's a standalone facility, you might want to consider security for measures such as bullards, the big things that come up that protect you from driving in. If you need fencing, it would be $44 a foot, linear foot generally. And the bollards would run about $1,300 a piece. So the question is, do you include all those costs in your security cost estimate? I think the answer is yes, But I believe, generally speaking, our community has considered cybersecurity to be software security only. So there's really an interesting book out called Tribe of Hackers that talks about the big myth. And what they have done is interviewed about 30 key cybersecurity specialists around the world and asked them a host of questions. One of the questions they asked is, what's the biggest myth? And interestingly enough, the cybersecurity people say that the biggest myth is that we're just one technical solution away from solving the problem. It's not always the hacker in the black hood that steals your data. It's also about trying to steal your personal information and numbers. And some would say the biggest myth is that spending money makes you more secure. I'm going to actually show you some analysis that says that there's actually a knee in the curve that shows you at a certain point you're not getting more secure with more money. And the bottom line, as you read this Tribe of Hackers book, is that cybersecurity is not hard. It's just a marathon. It's never ending. The ability of hackers to attack you is easier than our ability to protect. So cybersecurity is really, it means different things to different people. Yeah. For me personally, it means something different than it does to my small business. It does mean something different to a large business. It does mean something different to national security. So it's really about that, what they call the CIA triangle, the confidentiality of data, integrity of data, and availability of data. And all lifecycle cost estimates should address all the cost of protection and response. And again, what I'm seeing mostly in the cost world is that we're dealing with the computer security issues only. So this is an interesting chart that would show kind of the correlation between attackers and this, back to this same Apex company as a cloud provider and cloud resources. And a cyber criminal can come in through the cloud, they can come in through their private devices, they can come in through corporate owned devices. And this picture comes from a book called Cybersecurity Attack and Defense Strategies. It's really an interesting read, again, to look through that. But this says that on average, a company does not discover a breach until 200 days after the breach occurs. That's a bit scary if you think about it, that they could have, you hear the banks that say they've had a breach. They don't tell you that breach existed for several months before they found it. It also says that on average, the attacks are only about 25% internal, and that with more remote work, I think that this cordless attack process becomes even more and more critical. So there's a cyber kill chain. I think this was done by one of the commercial vendors, but it really showed the process of delivery and exploitation and command and control and recovery. And I don't think that we have thought about this whole process of threat and actors. So every cyber decision really hinges on two questions. Will it work? And is it affordable? So you really begin to ask yourself, who are the key threat actors? Now you might find this different in different sources, but essentially, generally speaking, you can determine that they're criminals, they're hacktivists, they're criminal hackers, they're competitors, they're foreign nations, and they're disgruntled employees. And that's kind of the set of threat actors. Now that's going to become important in just a little bit when I talk about the concept of a model. Now some threats are easier to cost than others. It's just not about hardware and solution. Some suggest the cost of protection is far greater than the cost to develop the threat, and that's what I mentioned earlier. There's a real world case of ransomware. I don't know if any of you have gotten something like this that says send me money and I'll release your files. That this is a real ransomware. This is a real WannaCry thing that struck many major businesses. So now we'll get down to the nuts and bolts of what I really want to talk about. Today, the approaches to cybersecurity cost analysis really fall into three categories. There's the economic cost-benefit model, and that's excellent for some businesses and business decisions. However, some benefits, like safety, security, reputation, they are really difficult to quantify. So I'm not sure the cost-benefit model gives me the right answer. Most of the work that I see today falls into the bottoms-up or engineering build-up model. And this is a great way to effectively cost what is defined. However, you face the classic known, unknown, and unknown issues. Any of you who remember Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld wrote a book about that. But for us in the cost world, the problem with the bottoms-up or engineering approach is it only costs what we know. It doesn't cost the things that we didn't know or didn't remember. So a top-down or parametric model is what we'd really like to see in the cyber world. And I'd like to have that model based on statistically valid cost and effect relationships. However, data is the key. When I gave this presentation or similar presentation to the cybersecurity conference at the University of Southern California, and their key analyst asked me what I meant by statistically valid cause and effect relationships. And I remembered early in my career, I started off as kind of a armored vehicle guy, and I was trying to develop a cost estimating relationship based on for heavy armored vehicles. And it turned out statistically, the size of the road wheel was the best predictor of the cost of the vehicle. And that just didn't make sense. It was a statistical anomaly. If I look at the early days when I began doing space work, it's almost funny to look back and think that weight was the primary cost driver of early spacecraft. And today it's almost the inverse. The less it weighs, the more it costs. So I'm looking for statistically valid cause and effect relationships. And as always, the key is data. So I think cybersecurity includes cost, infrastructure, it's people, it's software, it's policy, it's training, it's lifecycle management. And the chart on the right-hand side of the chart, this is a chart from the cost of malicious cyber activities in the U.S. Again, as much as anything today, I'm trying to give you access to real data sources. There is a cost of malicious cyber activity in the U.S. document put out almost every year. I don't know that I've seen the 2020 version yet, but it probably just came out. That is an excellent source of understanding where the threats are coming from and what the threats are costing at the very macro level. I would recommend you get that. So the ONS, total cost of ownership, sustainment of cybersecurity is a major issue, and we need to figure out how to do forensics and discovery and investigate and neutralize and recover. MITRE has a very interesting MITRE attack framework, and pardon me for going quickly through this, but in 25 minutes it's difficult to discuss all these areas. But this chart alone, you could spend an hour or so discussing all the things related to what really happens in the cyber world. So here's what I see. Today, cybersecurity costs are being assessed in two ways. Traditional WBS build-up, kind of the bottoms up, and pardon me for the advertisement I'm about to give, but Galler is in the process of trying to build a database and repository of cybersecurity items and trying to implement that solution in SEER. Again, the problem there is that I can only cost what's defined. There's also a cost risk or a net present value approach that tries to figure out what should each breach cost. But what I'm really missing is a top-down parametric approach. So again, a source that you may really want to investigate is a study by Gordon and Loeb. And this is just a chart that talks about how you would do a cost-benefit model of the net present value return on investment or internal rate of return You could use any of those. But their model shows, and I've got it quoted in blue on the screen, the amount a firm should spend to protect information is generally no more than 1/3 or so. They actually say 37% of projected loss for a breach. And above that level, in most cases, every dollar you spend reduces the anticipated loss by more than $1. So there's some hard decisions to make, but even at that, it says that the cost economic benefit model may not be the most effective way. So here's where I began to get myself in trouble. And as I said, I actually briefed this to Barry Beam and the staff at the University of Southern California. Wouldn't it be nice if I could come up with a parametric cyber cost analysis model? So with apologies to all of the software experts and the COCO experts out there, but COCO really says that the effort is equal to some modifiers times the size, and then you can talk about lines of code or function points or whatever. But my question is, could I take that approach and somehow apply that to a cyber model? I called it co-cyber mode. Again, you should have seen the reaction to the USC folks when I presented this. I did not realize at the time that USC is already proposing a common criteria evaluation assurance levels. That's what the CCEL model. And they have determined that they are actually trying to build a COCO for cybersecurity that's based on common criteria and evaluation levels. Again, the COCO approach that USC is dealing with only deals with the cost of software security. And as a matter of fact, preliminary results seem to indicate that a cybersecure software adds about 20%, includes about 20% more lines of code than a normal system. So that is the cybersecurity, what I call co-cyber approach. So because I'm foolish and was already embarrassed in front of all the USC folks, here's what I said. Is it possible for cybersecurity to build a model around 3 key criteria? First of all, sectors. So I'm proposing that national security is different from commercial, and commercial is different from other federal sectors. And so I would break the security problem into 3 large groups: national security, commercial, and other federal. Then I said, okay, who is likely to attack me from those sectors? And again, I think it's nation states, competitors, criminals, hacktivists, opportunists, and insiders. I recognize that this set will grow, and I recognize that the sectors may expand as we collect more data. And then I said, what are the minimum things I have to do to have a cybersecurity approach? So I think it's physical security, network security, education, malware, removal of media, secure configurations, user privileges, monitoring, and remote working. Again, that group could grow. So if you buy my concept that there would be 3 broad areas related to a parametric model, lo and behold, I came up with what I call secure, and it's called the Sector Evaluated Cyber Utility Risk Estimate. That's probably a terrible name, but it did spell secure, and so I felt real good about that. But here's what the model would look like. First, I break the problem into sectors. And again, you can see national security, commercial, and federal. Then I looked at the threats in each of those sectors, and I said, I probably can do a risk assessment and say national security's risk can be distributed over those categories, and the sum would have to be 100%. And then in each category, I would say, okay, if the national security, if it's national security and it's being attacked by a nation state, here are the 10 evaluation threats: physical, network, education. And I can develop a cost, low, medium, and high for each of those. And lo and behold, run that through and output that model and have a statistical distribution. And I think then I would have a fairly good parametric model. Again, some of the things you might ask, and if you haven't already, is couldn't you have more than just one sector operating at a time? The answer is yes. And couldn't you have more than the threat actors in the operations? Yes. And there's an old game in the US bar called Liar's Dice, and the first guy to go doesn't have a chance. And so in many respects, what I'm proposing probably will be picked apart, but we need to be, the critical issue facing a cost analyst is how do I develop a parametric approach? And the two keys to parametrics, one is identifying the cost drivers, and two is identifying the data that will allow me to build statistical relationships. So I thought I was doing really well, and then the University of Southern California folks told me that they had already worked part of that. But I had a similar discussion with the IFPUG function point user group, and they told me that I was all wrong, and that the ice bags guys told me that I needed to take a function point approach to this, where I looked at inputs and outputs and users and applications. But in either case, the issue is how do we identify data and collect data? So if you were expecting a great and permanent solution from today's discussion, I think you walk away unsatisfied, but my goal here was to try to get you to begin to get our broader community to begin to think about how do I approach this from a statistically valid relationship. And of course, we're trying to do that in SEER and trying to do that in other places. So that's my presentation. I believe we're on the right track, but I don't have the data to build the equations yet. So that's the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you so very much. We did get some questions during your presentation that we'll be happy to go to. The first one up is from Jesse.
Looking at the three keys, and in particular space dominance, how do changes in administrations and specifically the executive branch change the three keys?
Oh, so at the macro level, I don't know that there'll be a change. The space dominance is a critical issue facing all of us. Cybersecurity is, so the short answer is there's no change at the macro level. At the micro level, there will be some adjustments. There'll be changes to the leadership. I can just tell you, I heard the other day that the NASA director was resigning and to be replaced shortly. So I believe those three keys are going to be dominant features in our business for the next 5 years. So at the macro level, no change. At the micro level, there'll be lots of adjustments as the new administration comes in.
Thank you.
Very interesting presentation, Bob. I've had a look at development of parametric models for various purposes over a period of years, most recently looking at obsolescence management. But in the end, the problem, as you quite rightly say, always seems to come down to looking at what are the cost drivers and how to calibrate this cost estimating relationships. Now, it's a tough challenge, yet we know it can be done. We know that from the evidence of how many commercial tools there are out there and how successfully these are used. So I guess my question comes down to, how did they do it? What can we learn from the way people have done it before when we're developing new models? And really, for me, the main problem is, how do we elicit that enthusiastic contribution of data towards calibration of the next parametric model? It's trying to get people to be in the mindset of willing to volunteer hard-won data and being willing to share that with other people in the public domain, I guess.
That is a wonderful question, and it really is part of what was coming from my presentation. In the specific case of cybersecurity, I think the problem is we have not defined what it is yet, and so there's been no consolidated data collection effort because it's not defined. I would advise you to go to the University of Southern California website. While I disagree with their approach to cybersecurity in that they're only looking at software development, they actually are collecting data because the question is well defined. So the broad answer to your question, in my opinion, is that we need to have our community consolidate around a question of what is cybersecurity. Then we could identify cost drivers and collect data.
Right, thank you.
And many thanks to Megan and Dave Sherman who made this happen. So we look forward to inviting you all on our next workshop, which is on the 24th of November, where we got Andy Nolan from Rolls-Royce UK, and he's going to talk about the art of judgment, and Christian Smart from Galrat going to talk about the quantitative risk management imperative. Two presentation worth looking forward to. Until then, be safe and see you all next time. Many thanks for joining. Bye for now.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.